Today we're getting into the presidential election of 1832.
Right. A really pivotal moment in American history.
Absolutely. It wasn't just another election. It really fundamentally shook up the political scene in a country that was, well, growing incredibly fast.
Yeah, you had all this westward expansion happening and this new sort of idea about democracy emerging. More populist, maybe?
Exactly. And at the same time, the economy was volatile. You had these really powerful banks playing a huge role.
Which set the stage perfectly for conflict. And right in the middle of it all was President Andrew Jackson.
So our mission here is to really unpack this election using the historical accounts we have. We want to figure out the key drivers and, what its lasting impact really was.
Okay.
Let's start with the key players. First, obviously, President Andrew Jackson. He's the Democrat, the incumbent.
A war hero, right. Old Hickory.
That's him.
Yeah.
Seen as a champion of the, quote, common man. And he was deeply critical of elite institutions, especially one in particular.
The Bank of the United States.
Which brings us to his main rival, Henry Clay. He's running for the new National Republican Party.
Clay was a heavyweight in Congress, a really seasoned legislator.
And he championed something called the American system. What exactly was that?
Well, it was basically his economic plan. Think protective tariffs to help American industry, federal funding for infrastructure, roads, canals, and, crucially, support for a national bank.
Okay, so a very different vision from Jackson's.
Oh, completely different.
And then there was a third candidate, William Wirt.
Ah, yes. The Anti-Masonic Party.
America's first third party, which is fascinating in itself.
It really is. And their whole platform was driven by this deep suspicion of secret societies, mainly the Freemasons.
They saw them as a threat to democracy.
Pretty much. They believed these secret groups held undue influence and operated, outside of public accountability. It really speaks to the anxieties of the time, I think.
That undercurrent of distrust towards anything seen as elite or hidden.
Exactly. In a young republic still figuring things out, that kind of suspicion found fertile ground.
So even with three candidates, it feels like the whole election really boiled down to one central fight.
Oh, absolutely. The Bank of the United States. It was the issue.
Jackson's view was pretty clear. He called it a monster, right?
He did. He saw it as this dangerous concentration of financial power, basically a tool for the wealthy, the elite, at the expense of ordinary people. Unconstitutional, even.
And Clay.
Clay was on the opposite side. He argued the bank was absolutely essential for a stable economy, for regulating currency, for national prosperity. You couldn't have a modern economy without it, basically.
So, two fundamentally opposed views on this massive economic institution. Okay, let's get deeper into this bank controversy. It sounds like Clay had a specific strategy here.
He did. It was a calculated gamble, really. Clay and his allies in Congress decided to push for the bank's recharter early.
Early. Its charter wasn't due to expire yet.
No, not for a few more years. But Clay wanted to force the issue during the election campaign.
Why? What was the thinking there?
The idea was to put Jackson in a bind. If Jackson signed the recharter bill, he'd risk angering his base, the common man voters who distrusted the bank.
Okay.
But if he vetoed it, Clay figured they could paint him as wrecking the economy, as being irresponsible, maybe scare off moderate voters.
Knowing Jackson, though, wasn't a veto almost predictable. He wasn't exactly shy about his feelings.
You could definitely argue that. Maybe Clay underestimated how Jackson would play it or how popular the anti-bank sentiment actually was.
So Jackson gets the bill.
And he vetoes it, forcefully.
He didn't just say no, did he?
Not at all. The veto message itself was a powerful political document. He laid out his case. The bank was unconstitutional. It favored the rich and powerful, the moneyed interests over farmers and laborers, and it was a threat to liberty.
Wow. So he framed it as a moral battle, almost.
Absolutely. It became this huge symbol of his fight against entrenched power. It resonated deeply with people who felt left out or exploited by the financial system. This wasn't just about economics. It was about who runs the country.
Which must have made the campaign itself incredibly intense.
Oh, it was fierce and very personal.
We hear about the opposition calling Jackson King Andrew. What was that about?
That was the National Republicans trying to frame him as a tyrant, basically, an autocrat.
Why?
Well, Jackson used the veto more than previous presidents. He acted decisively, sometimes against Congress. So they painted him as someone trampling on the Constitution, exceeding his authority, acting like a king.
Trying to scare people about his power.
Exactly. A threat to the balance of power, they argued.
And Jackson's side. How do they go after Clay?
They hit Clay hard as being an out-of-touch aristocrat, someone who didn't understand or care about ordinary working people.
Playing up the common man versus elite angle again.
Constantly, they contrasted Jackson the war hero, the man of the people, with Clay, the Washington insider, friend of the bankers. It was a stark image they pushed.
And meanwhile, the anti-Masons are campaigning on the dangers of secret societies.
Right. Adding another layer to the whole thing, focusing on that theme of hidden influence corrupting democracy.
Now, something else really important happened in 1832, structurally speaking. The first national political conventions.
Yes. That's a huge development. Before 1832, presidential nominations were usually handled by congressional caucuses or state legislatures, kind of an inside game.
But in 32,
The parties held national conventions. Jackson's Democratic Party actually held the very first one. They officially nominated Jackson for president and Martin Van Buren for vice president.
why is that such a big deal?
Well, it formalized the nomination process on a national scale. It involved delegates ostensibly representing broader party members. It made the parties themselves, as national organizations, much more central to picking the candidates.
So it wasn't just a procedural tweak. It changed how presidential politics worked.
Fundamentally, it aimed for broader participation, at least in theory, and cemented the role of organized national parties. And, well, it's stuck. It's basically the system we still use today, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. It became a permanent fixture. Okay, so the campaigns were run, the conventions were held.
Yeah.
What happened when the votes came in?
It was decisive, a landslide for Jackson.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Jackson got 219 electoral votes. Clay only managed 49.
Wow. And Wirt, the anti-Mason.
He carried just one state, Vermont, 7 electoral votes.
So a commanding victory in the Electoral College. What about the popular vote?
Jackson won that comfortably, too. It confirmed his broad support. It wasn't just an electoral college quirk. He genuinely had widespread appeal.
So a clear mandate. And this win, it must have had major consequences, especially given the whole bank fight.
Huge consequences. First, Jackson felt vindicated in his war against the bank. His victory emboldened him to take further steps to dismantle it, like removing federal deposits.
Which led to?
While many historians argue that contributed significantly to economic instability down the road, culminating in the Panic of 1837, a major depression.
So his victory had immediate economic reverberations.
Definitely. But there were political consequences, too. The election really solidified the two-party system Democrats versus, at this point, the National Republicans, who would soon evolve into the Whigs. Parties became even more central.
And what about the presidency itself?
Jackson's victory and how he achieved it really strengthened the office. He positioned the president as the direct representative of all the people, not just someone executing laws passed by Congress. He asserted presidential power in a new way.
It sounds like 1832 wasn't just an election. It was the start of something new, a shift towards a different kind of politics.
I think that's exactly right. Many see 1832 as a key moment, maybe the key moment in the dawn of American populism.
Populism, how so?
Well, the focus shifted decisively. It became much more about mobilizing the common man, appealing directly to ordinary voters, often by setting them against perceived elites, whether financial elites like the bank supporters or political elites. That rhetoric, that dynamic really took center stage.
The voice of the average voter becoming more powerful, or at least politicians appealing to it more directly.
Precisely. It signaled a change in who politicians needed to reach and how they needed to campaign. The direction of the nation was increasingly being shaped, or at least debated, in terms of the people versus the powerful.
So looking back at 1832 through this deep dive, it's clear it's not just some dusty historical event.
Not at all.
The forces unleashed then, the arguments made.
Yeah.
They seem to echo, don't they?
They really do. Which maybe leaves you, the listener, with something to think about.
Yeah.
Consider those core tensions from 1832, that push and pull between popular will, the voice of the common man, and the influence of established institutions, maybe elites. How do you see that dynamic playing out today? What current political debates or conflicts seem to tap into that same fundamental tension that was so central back in 1832? It's something worth mulling over, I think.